Okay, awesome. So we are going to be talking about how to factor polynomials today. And this is going to be an introduction to a new polynomials unit. So if you've watched any of the previous videos or you're in my class, we will have talked already about multiplying polynomials. We've used algebra tiles together, and we've talked about adding and subtracting polynomials. Now we're talking about factoring polynomials. Now, for the sake of the video, I'm not going to go over greatest common factors again, but we will be using those principles. So you want to make sure that you have reviewed greatest common factors, or GCF. And if you need a refresher, or you can go rewatch one of the previous videos that I have posted on GCF to help refresh your memory for that. But today we are going to be talking about factoring trinomials. And one of the most standard forms of trinomials that we see is x squared plus bx plus c. Now this is a super standard form of a trinomial. And remember, a trinomial is a thing with, or a mathematical expression with three terms. So our three terms are the x squared, the bx, and c. C is constant in this situation. However, that is not related to the fact that it is a letter C. It could be any letter that you would like it to be. It just happens to be C when we write it out in standard form. So previously what we were doing was we were getting rid of the brackets that we were given, and now we're adding those back in. So what we want to do is be able to factor some common terms out. Now there's a couple of different ways that we can do this, but the main thing that we want to remember here is that the two numbers, we're going to find two numbers. Those two numbers are going to, are going to add to equal b, and those same two numbers are going to multiply to equal c. Okay, so that is what we are going to be doing, and that is the thing that you need to remember. And so we can go through and practice this a couple of times here. So if I ask you to find two numbers whose product is 20 and the sum is 5. Okay, so sum, remember, sum means the answer when we add things together, and the product means the answer when we multiply things together. And so I've just put those little symbols above each number so that you guys can follow along with that. However, if I'm trying to find the numbers that work for this, so the two numbers that I'm going to use to help factor this, and I'll explain what we're going to do with those in a second, we can do it a couple of different ways. One of the most common ways to do it is to list it. So here, I'm going to go 1 times 20. Okay, I'm going to check the products first because it's a little bit easier. Now, 1 and 20, there is no way that that is going to add to equal 5. So that does not work. Now I could try again. 2 times 10. Okay, well, 2 times 10, if I add it together, is going to be 12. So 2 plus 10 equals 12. So this does not work, and that does not work there. I can also do a couple other things. So I can do 4 times 5. Okay. Or -4 and -5. Either way, positive or negative, doesn't matter. And 4 times 5 is equal to 20. And 4 plus 5, is equal to 9. And so that matches my sum of 5. So my goodness, so sorry. Sum of 9, there is nothing that is going to add to that. Whose product is 20 and sum is 9. I realized I made that mistake before. That's just my error in writing out the question. And so 4 plus 5 does have a sum of 9. And so this is going to be our two numbers here. Now, this is the most common way to do it, and most of the time you can do it this way. However, sometimes they're a little bit harder to find a factor that works. And so you might have to use positives and negative values in order to find that. For example, if we have a product of -6 and a sum of -5, okay? So this is going to look like 1 times 6, that equals 6, and then 1 plus 6. Okay, so it can't be both positives because we have to have a product that equals negative is equal to 7, so that doesn't work. -1 times 6 equals -6, and 6 minus 1 equals 5, but not -5. So now I've got to rearrange this a little bit to make it make sense. So I'm going to stick with those two numbers because I'm getting the right values. But what happens if I go 1 times -6? Well, I still get a product of -6. But now if I go 1 minus 6, I'm left with a sum of -5. Okay? And so those two numbers added together or subtracted are going to equal -5, and then I have my two numbers that I've done. Okay, so what do you actually do with those two numbers? Well, when you're given a practice problem from your book or in any situation, you'll be asked to factor a trinomial. So factor the following trinomial. Okay, and that will typically look like this: x squared minus 4x minus 21. So if we remember from before, that middle term here, b, is going to be what my numbers add together. So the two numbers that I need to pick need to add to equal -4. Okay, that's how I abbreviate it here, just for the sake of this. And this is c, so they need to multiply to equal -21. Now, don't forget that these signs that are right before the numbers are there for a reason, and you do not want to ignore them. So now I begin to try to find the numbers that are going to add to equal -4 and multiply to equal -21. And I'm going to do that with my list method. So 21 times by 1 equals 21, but I remember it's a negative value, so at least one of those needs to be negative here. So I write that out, and then I'm going to go -21 plus 1 is 20. Okay, that's not my value because it does not add to equal my sum of -4. So I'm also going to go, okay, the next one that I can think of for 21 is 3 and 7. And I'm going to make the first one a negative value just because I can, and that equals 21. And then I'm going to go, okay, so -3 plus 7 is equal to 4. Wait a second, I'm close. So now I can see that my value of 4 here is positive, and I need a -4 value. So I'm going to try just swapping those signs. And so I'm going to go 3 times -7 equals -21. And then I'm going to add those together. So I'm going to go 3 plus -7, or -7, is equal to -4, and I have figured it out. Okay, so now what I'm actually going to do with those values, this is the important part. I'm going to stick those into the middle of my equation. So I'm going to break this guy up into two different terms. So I'm going to be left with x squared minus, okay, 7x plus 3x. So now this is very important. You need to get those signs right. They don't both stay negative, because if I were to add those two together, I'm going to be left with the correct -4 value minus 21. Okay, so all I've done is rewrite my expression. I haven't actually changed any of the values, because if I were to simplify this equation or expression again, I would be left with the exact same thing that I started with. Now I'm going to work on pulling out my common factors that I see. So this first one here, I'm going to work in and split this in half, okay? Oops. Okay, so x squared minus 7x. A common term between the both of these guys is an x. They both share an x value. So I'm going to pull out the x, and then I'm going to leave what's left over. So I've taken one x away from my x squared, so I'm left with x. And then I've taken the x from the 7, so I'm going to go minus 7. That's my first term. I'm going to leave it like that, okay? Now this next one here, I'm going to put that little positive plus sign here right away. So I'm going to leave that outside of the brackets. Then I'm going to be left with 3x minus 21. Now, we already know that 3 multiplies into 21 because I solved for that up here. So I'm going to take out the 3, and I'm going to left with the x, okay? So I've left the x inside. I've taken the 3 outside. And then minus, I've taken 3 of this 21. Now that does not make it 18. What that's doing is dividing that number, because remember when we had it before, we were multiplying back in with FOIL. And so now I'm taking that 3 away from the 21, and I'm going to be left with minus 7. What you should notice at this point, that both brackets are exactly the same. So we have x minus 7 and x minus 7. And so now I'm going to rewrite this just to keep it nice and simple. This x and this 3 are going to get stuck in my first bracket. So I'm going to have x plus 3. I'm going to put that in a nice little bracket just so that they're all nice and tidy. Because these are exactly the same, I know that they count as one factor of my polynomial or trinomial here. So I'm just going to write x minus 7. Okay, I don't need to write x minus 7 squared because they're not being multiplied together. They were both pulled out of the equation. Now watch this. So this is my final answer when you're asked to factor the following trinomial, but I'm going to show you how this works. So if I'm going to undo this for you. X times x is x squared. X minus 7 is minus 7x plus 3x minus 21. Now I can simplify x squared minus 4x minus 21. And I have officially solved this polynomial or factoring this trinomial. Again, this is my answer. This was showing you how it actually works. And so you can do this with any trinomial that follows this pattern. If there is a different pattern, you do need to do a few steps, and I'll explain that in the next video. But for now, you are able to start the exercise set and practice questions that you have been given by your teacher for this section. If you have any questions, you can please let your teacher know or me know in the comments below.